Francesco, and thank you all for coming tonight. As I was listening to you gentlemen talk, I was reminded of a book in English that came out recently by an English historian named Tom Holland. In English, it's called Dominion. And in the book, Tom Holland talks about how Christianity made the Western world. Tom Holland is not a believer, but he speaks frankly in the book about how the things that he loves as a secular liberal about Western civilization came out of Christianity, and how he has a new respect for Christianity and wants to defend Christianity, even though he is not a Christian, because he loves this culture. In the same way, there's a very controversial American public intellectual named Camille Paglia. She is an atheist, a lesbian, and very, very combative in her public appeals. I interviewed her some years ago, and Camille told me that she hated that Christianity was declining in America. I said, Camille, that's very strange. You're an atheist. Why do you care? She said, well, that's true. I don't care about God, but I care about art. She teaches art. She said, I have to spend so much time with my undergraduate students teaching them basic Bible stories so they can understand art. And as we are losing the Christian religion, we're also losing any feeling for the artistic and literary heritage of the West. So these are two people who are outside the church, but they understand that if we lose Christianity, we will lose the heart and soul of what it means to be Western. And that's not nothing. I think on the question of the culture war, nobody likes to talk about culture war, especially Christians. We don't like to think in terms of there being combat. Well, we may not be interested in the culture war, but the culture war is interested in us. And this may be a difference between America and Europe now, but as you will have heard, America is in the grips of wokeness. Wokeness is this post-liberal, extremely intolerant, moralistic ideology that will not tolerate any challenge to itself. The left in America, the woke left, have abandoned old-fashioned liberalism and now believe in this militant progressive ideology. They see any resistance to what they demand as aggression. So, for example, last week in Texas, there was a headline in a newspaper that said, parents attacking transgender students. Well, what does this mean? This meant that some parents were saying, wait, we don't want gender ideology taught to our kids. We as parents need to have some say in what gets taught to our kids. The way this sort of story is always told in the American media is conservatives are attacking, Christians are attacking. And by now, this is a very old story. I know that any American sitting in this room has heard this a million times, but this is how it always works. Because the left controls the narrative in my country, it controls the media, it controls all of the institutions, the cultural institutions, it genuinely does see resistance to the woke narrative as an act of aggression. If you resist critical race theory, for example, which is another of the two pillars of wokeness, the first one being gender ideology, the second being critical race theory. If you reject critical race theory for any reason, if you even question it, you are immediately attacked as a racist who is waging culture war. Why do these conservatives constantly wage culture war? This is the narrative, and they really believe it. We can't avoid this. I think that it may not be that our opponents fail to understand what we Christians really are. I think maybe they understand exactly who we are in the areas that count. For example, you cannot be a faithful Christian a faithful Catholic or any kind of faithful Orthodox or Protestant Christian in any traditional sense. You can't be that person and accept gender ideology, nor can you be a faithful Christian and accept critical race theory, because what they have in common is both of them deny Christian anthropology. They directly challenge what we think a person is. And if either one of these ideologies, gender ideology or critical race theory, takes hold within institutions, that is within universities, within media, within churches, as is happening, then it will displace the traditional Christian anthropology, our idea of what a man and a woman are. Well, they understand this, I think. The woke understand this, and that's why they are fighting so hard to suppress Christianity. I think that many of us want to believe that we can find accommodation with these people, that, you know, if we just sit down and talk to them in a nice way, they will see that we aren't so bad after all, and we can reach a modus vivendi with them. I wish that were possible. I think it was possible when I was younger and classical liberalism was still the main ideology of American life. But those days are over now. They do not tolerate us at all. There's a guy in America, a professor named Joshua Katz at Princeton University. He's one of the top scholars of the classics of Greco-Roman culture in the US. He's being driven out of Princeton University now because he dared to stand up against critical race theory being brought into all areas of education. Believe it or not, in Princeton, one of the top universities in America, they now want to bring critical race theory to the study of the classics because they want to decolonize the study of Greece and Rome. I mean, it's insane, but this is the madness, the mob madness that has taken over American academic life. Well, Joshua Katz is not a conservative, and until recently, he wasn't even a Christian. He's recently converted. But he said, hang on, wait a minute. We don't need to do this to our scholarship. This would suppress dissenting opinion. He was immediately attacked by a mob of fellow academics at Princeton and students, and now he's on the verge of losing his job. This is the reality in American life. If it's not like that in Europe, God bless Europe, please fight for old-fashioned liberalism because it has been driven out of most places in American life. I bring up Joshua Katz because 2 weeks ago in Budapest, in Hungary, where I'm living now, Joshua Katz was in town for a conference. I sat down with another American academic, this man, a left-wing atheist named Peter Boghossian. Peter is in town in Budapest as a fellow of the MCC college there, as am I. Peter and I have very different worldviews, but we are both against wokeness because we believe in classical liberalism. We had a conversation on a stage at the conference about gender ideology and about wokeness. Even though we disagreed strongly on some views, it was a normal conversation. It was the sort of thing that when I was a student in the 1980s was perfectly common. People could disagree, could tolerate each other and leave as friends. This sort of thing is not possible in most American universities today. Joshua Katz has an article out on the internet today where he said how extraordinary it was to sit there in Budapest and watch these two very different Americans, me and Peter Boghossian, just have a discussion about gender ideology. Joshua said, if this was an American university, students would have stood up and screamed at me or at both of us, and the police would have come, and Peter would have to worry about his job, his career in academia, simply for dissenting. I bring this up in the context of the culture war for Christians because this is the reality in which all of us have to live. It started out in a small way in universities and in the media, but now this ideology has expanded to control every one of the major institutions of American life. Academia, as I said, in media, Hollywood, sports, of all things, law, medicine, even the US military and the CIA. If you want to have a good laugh, go on to the CIA's channel on YouTube and watch the woke recruitment ads for the CIA. I'm not kidding. They're there. And this is how deep this ideology has penetrated. It is a totalitarian ideology. What do I mean by that? A few years ago in the United States, I began to hear from people who came to America from communist countries, escaping the Soviet bloc. And they were saying that the things they see happening in America now remind them of what they left behind. And I thought, well, gosh, that sounds really extreme. We don't have gulags. We don't have secret police. We have freedom of speech. How could this be totalitarian? Well, once I began to talk to them more, I began to see what they were seeing. This is not Stalinism 2.0, but it is still totalitarian. Why? Because in a totalitarian society, there is only one political ideology that is permitted, and everything in society becomes politicized. So in the US right now, we still have freedom of speech and all the constitutional freedoms. So this is not something coming from the state entirely or even mostly. But if all the culture forming institutions in American life if all the leadership has fallen to this ideology, then the effect is the same as if the state were forbidding it. If you as a professor or as a businessman or as a journalist, as a writer, if you are not permitted to say what you think without having to fear that you will be attacked by a mob, that you will lose your job, that you will lose your business, you will lose your friends and your status, then what is the difference between that and hard totalitarianism? Well, you can say, at least we don't have the gulag, thank God for that. That's why I call this soft totalitarianism. And it's also a totalitarianism that is based on compassion. And this is why I think a lot of Christians are falling into this. It's a totalitarianism that says we have to build a society that respects the victim above all, and the desires of the victim to be protected from words that damage them. Well, we should all be respectful of people, but to be a free person and to live in a free society, you have to be able to speak the truth. In so many places today in America, you cannot speak the truth because you will be accused of hurting the victims, hurting LGBTs or people of color, etc. And this is even happening now in some churches where you can't speak the truth. This is a deep, deep threat to the future of Christianity, because I think we are quickly going to see traditional Christianity, which is to say a Christianity that does not conform to wokeness. It is going to be forbidden, and Christians are going to be persecuted for believing what we do. I wasn't the first one to say this. The people who grew up with this in the Soviet bloc were the first ones to say this. And I've come to believe that they are right. This wokeness is going so fast and becoming so severe that so many American Christians don't even know what's happening, and they want to ignore it. I spoke to a priest last year, a parish priest, and said, "Father, what are you doing to prepare your congregation, the families there, for gender ideology?" Gender ideology has spread so far and so fast in American life. It's in all the schools. It's in kindergarten, it's on children's television, it's even on the boxes for children's breakfast cereal. I'm not kidding you. Last year on Gay Pride Month, and really isn't every month Gay Pride Month, on Gay Pride Month, there was a famous breakfast cereal that had on its box suggestions for young children to practice their different pronouns, experiment with pronouns. You can't sit down and have breakfast without this ideology coming at you. Well, I said this to the priest and he said, "Oh, no, we don't talk about that here. We don't want politics in the church." I said, "Well, look, I agree with you. Politics don't have a place in the church, but this isn't politics. This is basic Christian teaching. You have to prepare people to be faithful against these anti-Christian assaults." He could only see it, this priest, as culture war, which to him said politics, and he wouldn't talk about it. This is crazy. We cannot live this way. The church has to have the confidence to proclaim what it believes and to understand that it is necessary to proclaim it, and not only to proclaim it, but to train its own people in the Christian faith. That is to say, we have to have better catechesis, but not only better catechesis, but also better practice, better discipleship, as we say in English. Because knowing the faith up here is not going to be enough. We have to build strong communities within the parish, within schools, and within families, where the faith is not just a series of intellectual propositions, but a way of life. And we also have to learn how to suffer for the faith. In my book, Live Not by Lies, Vivir Sin Mentiras, I went to the former communist countries of the East and interviewed Christians who stayed behind and lived out a Christian life amid communist persecution. I wanted to find out from them, how should we prepare in the West if this really is coming? The most important lesson they gave me was that people in the West have to prepare to suffer. That is to say, Christians in the West must rediscover the importance of suffering for Christ. This is a depressing thing that so many of us don't want to think about, but this is reality. I remember a Russian Baptist pastor looked me in the eye on a street in Moscow and said, Rod, go back and tell the Christians of the West, if you are not prepared to suffer and seriously suffer for your faith, then you've already lost. That's a serious thing to hear from a man who suffered true persecution. But we have become so soft because we don't want to face the reality of the culture war. I'll end on this and then we can have a conversation. When I was in Hungary 3 years ago doing research talking to Hungarian dissidents, my translator was a young Catholic woman, Anna, 32 years old, married with a small child. And we were on the tram going through Budapest. And Anna said, Rod, you know, I struggle as a Catholic, trying to talk to my Catholic friends about the problems I have. If I say to them, my husband and I are fighting, they immediately say, well, you have to get a divorce then. You have to be happy. Or if I say, I'm having trouble with my little boy, I'm not sleeping well at night because he's not sleeping well, they say, well, put him in daycare, go get a job, you have to be happy. She said, I tell them, oh, I am happy. I'm happy being a wife, I'm happy being a mother. But, you know, life has struggle in it. Even a happy life has struggle in it. She said, even my Catholic friends don't understand that. I looked at her and said, Anna, it sounds like you're fighting for your right to be unhappy. She said, that's it. Where did you get that? I pulled my phone out and went to chapter 17 of Aldous Huxley's book, Brave New World. I don't know how many people have read Brave New World here, but it's about a totalitarianism that's not based on fear and terror, but rather about manipulating comfort and safety. In this totalitarian world, everybody gives up their freedom so they can have all the drugs they need to help them feel good, all the pornography that will help them be entertained and stimulated, and all the sex they want. The world controller for Europe in this chapter 17 meets a dissident, a man who's living outside of society. He brings him in and says, why don't you want to be part of this society? We give you Christianity without tears. In other words, you get all the benefits of Christianity, but no suffering. And the dissident says, well, I think you're all too comfortable. I want beauty. I want sin. I want music. I want art. I want poetry. And he wants to live a human life, because to live an authentic human life requires the possibility of suffering. And the world controller says, it sounds like you're fighting for your right to be unhappy. He goes, okay, I am fighting for my right to be unhappy. The world controller says, you can have it. Well, this is the world we're in today. If we do not return a sense of suffering, the importance of suffering and the sacredness of suffering for Christ and for the truth, if we don't return that to the center of our experience of living out the Christian faith, then we are going to collapse in the face of this soft totalitarianism. In the 4th century of the Christian epoch, that is the century that Europe turned officially from paganism to Christianity. There is a fantastic book by an American historian named Edward Watts called The Final Pagan Generation. And in it, Watts explains that the pagan elites of Rome did not see what was happening around them. They could see the rise of this Christian cult, but they thought that Rome would remain pagan because it always had been pagan. For many centuries, Rome was pagan. The pagan temples were still there, still standing. Pagan festivals were going on. But right under their noses, Roman civilization was becoming Christian. And by the end of the 4th century, it was over for the pagans. They would still be around for a little while, but it was over. I fear that we're living in the 4th century now here in the West, but we Christians are the old pagans. I don't think that history has faded. We still have the ability to change history. God gave us free will. But if we are going to change history and not only survive as Christians, but be able to re-Christianize the world, then we are going to have to see the world, the conditions around us with clear eyes, without sentimentality, and live with confidence, with courage, and with discipline to be faithful to Jesus Christ in a world that no longer is Christian. Well, thank you for the comments and the question. This is why I thought it was so important to ask Christians who stayed behind how they did it, how they survived without losing their integrity. And it all goes back to willingness to suffer. As I said, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, in a message he sent to his followers in the Soviet Union just before the Russians exiled him to the West, he told them to live not by lies. What he meant by that was that there was no way they could overturn the Soviet system. But one thing they could do in their ordinary lives was to refuse to say things that they did not believe were true. You know, this was a small way of dissenting, but he said, for example, if you're in a meeting where people can't speak the truth, then you should stand up and walk out. Don't sign something that you don't believe, only to avoid trouble. Solzhenitsyn said, if enough of us do this, we could change the world. In a similar way, Václav Havel, when he was a playwright and a political prisoner in Czechoslovakia, he told a story about the greengrocer. This is I'm sorry if some of you know this, but this is a really important story. It's a myth, a fable that Havel invented. He said, imagine that you are the owner of a greengrocer shop in a communist city. You have in the window of your store a little sign that says, "Workers of the world, unite." Every store in the city has it. Nobody believes it, but they all put it there so they can avoid trouble. Well, one day, the greengrocer takes the sign out of his window because he's sick of telling this lie. What happens to him? Well, the secret police come, they arrest him, they take away his business, and now he has to go clean toilets for a living. His children lose privileges. They can't go to the best universities, and so on. He has lost a lot. He has paid a significant price. But what has he gained? Well, he has saved his honor, for one thing, but he has also shown the world around him that it is possible to live in truth if you're willing to suffer for it. And if enough people believe that, then the lies that this false system of communism, of totalitarianism is built on will collapse. I think that there's an important lesson there for us to learn as we face this new system. If we are willing to sacrifice positions at, say, Princeton University, as Joshua Katz is, for the sake of the truth, It's going to mean a real price. Joshua Katz, if he gets fired, will pay a real price for that, but he will have shown that it is possible to survive it, because we're not being sent to the gulag. You're facing professional ruin, but that's not the worst thing in the world. The worst thing in the world is to tell a lie because you're afraid to suffer. And I think that this might be the most important lesson that we can learn as we face this soft totalitarianism. Secondly, I don't know how long it will stay soft. We saw in Canada recently when the truckers were protesting, the Canadian government used a law to take away the bank accounts of protesting truckers and even people, citizens of Canada, who were sympathetic to them. This is terrifying. This is something straight out of the social credit system of China. I think that we are going to see in the next few years this strategy used against any dissenters from wokeness, from the ideology that controls American institutions, maybe even in Europe too. And so people will be forced, people who are dissenters will be forced to figure out how they're going to make a living if they can't make money, if there's a social credit system. That is something that I think we need to be aware of and to fight against. But if you're in America, North America right now, you see that people who are dissidents are being spoken of as threats to public order, as maybe domestic terrorists, things like that. It's terrifying, this kind of language. But again, the experience of the Soviet people who lived under Soviet communism can prepare us for the way language is being misused to allow a certain sect within the society to gain power over everybody else. The thing that we have to have very clear in our minds right now is that the progressive left is not liberal anymore. It does not see the public square as neutral. You can see this within my profession in journalism. When I came into the industry in 1989, everybody knew that journalism was a liberal profession. I was liberal back then, but it was a respectable liberalism, a liberalism that believed in fairness and telling both sides of the story. It was an approach to truth, knowing that we can never get the whole truth, but we can get closer to it. That is over now. The old-fashioned journalists have been driven out or are being driven out by this new, young, radical Jacobin clique of journalists who believe that fairness is only gives evil a foothold. I'll give you an example. When I was at the Dallas Morning News on the editorial board back in 2005, I was talking to a younger colleague about the whole gay marriage debate. It was still a big debate in America. And I said to him, don't you think our newspaper treats the Christians unfairly? We never give the Christian argument here, the argument against same-sex marriage. And my young colleague said, well, of course we don't, because that's evil. Like, well, what do you mean? He said, if we were at this newspaper during the civil rights movement to get civil rights for Black people, do you think that we have a professional responsibility as journalists to give equal attention to the Ku Klux Klan? I was shocked by this. He literally thought that the churches, the Catholic churches, the Protestant churches were the equivalent of the Ku Klux Klan. He couldn't see it any other way. And this is such a common view among journalists of his generation. And this is why the old-fashioned liberals are being driven out. This is the sort of thing I mean about how we have to wake up and realize that we don't live in the same world in which we who are of a certain age grew up. It is different. It is ideologically shifted, and they have no interest in being fair to us and reaching a way we can live together in peace in a pluralistic world. They want to see our defeat and ruin. I think that we in the West have lost something precious in the last 3 years of COVID, 2 or 3 years of COVID, and that is the authority of science. In my country, when COVID first hit in 2020, the scientists told us to stay at home, wear your mask, do not come out and get together. And then George Floyd was killed. Suddenly, we had mass protests everywhere. Scientists including doctors, said, well, no, now we have to go into the street to protest because racism is a bigger public health threat than COVID. Wait, what? That's what they did. And so we began to see that science was politicized, and now people don't know whether they can believe anything that scientists say. Dr. Fauci, Tony Fauci, the top public health official in the US, when COVID first hit, he said, we don't think you need to wear a mask. Well, he later admitted that he was saying that because he didn't want all the people to run out and buy the masks so there wouldn't be enough for hospitals. All right, I understand why you did that, but the fact is you took your authority as a top scientist and made it subordinate to a political goal. With transgenderism in the US, it is impossible now in many hospitals to question the trans narrative. In my book, Live Not by Lies, I talked to a doctor at a major American hospital, a Catholic, who told me that the orders had come down from the top of the hospital that if a child presents himself or herself as transgender and wants hormones or wants surgery, then the hospital is to give it to them, even if it goes against the best medical judgment of the doctor, because of cultural politics. Medical science is out the window. It's all about politics now. And we see over and over in different universities, scientific faculties, the scientists who teach on academic faculties are being silenced. They can't say what they really believe or they will be attacked. There's so many stories like this. The Scientific American magazine, it's one of the top American science magazines. It recently published an editorial after the death of E.O. Wilson. Professor Wilson was one of the top insect biologists of all time. He recently died. Scientific American attacked this great scientist as being giving aid and comfort to racism. He said nothing about race, but his insect biology, according to this scientist who attacked him, could be used to justify racism. It was a shocking thing because Wilson himself was considered one of the greatest scientists of the 20th century. But now, in the most prestigious science magazine in America, he's denounced as an ally of racist. So when we see all this happening now, any sane person with common sense must say that we can't accept as science whatever scientists say, because we have to think about what are their political motivations, or what are they not allowed to say. This is getting into technology fields too. And I'm afraid that we are going to have to live through an era when bridges fall down, when planes fall from the sky, because we have not been able to tell the truth about how the material world works. I don't know any way to stop this because scientists are so afraid. They just want to most of them just want to do their work. They don't want to be politicized, but the culture war has come for them, and it's coming for them from other scientists who are heavily politicized. You even have now in some American school districts, you're going to think this is crazy, but they talk about math is racist. It's racist to say 2 + 2 = 4. I'm not kidding. They're coming up with an inclusive math curriculum that talks about math facts as being more inclusive and sensitive to people of color. I mean, this is how far the madness has gone, and I can't see anything that stops it. Finally, you were mentioning, Francisco, about journalism having the appearance of truth. When you said that you're part of a political party trying to stop this, I don't know if you're a member of the Vox Party or not, but in the United States, whenever there's any mention of the Vox Party in the newspapers, or of Viktor Orban's Fidesz party, or of the Law and Justice Party in Poland, it is always described as far right. So if you're an American who doesn't know any better, you think the Vox Party are marching in the street with jackboots like the Nazis, or you think of the hooligans of the Fidesz party of Law and Justice. It's a complete lie. But if the only way that the American people have of hearing about European politics is through the American media and their own biases, we have no idea what's going on. It's the appearance of truth you talk about. And I've been in Hungary for this past month. I was there last summer, and I saw for myself in Hungary and also visiting Spain that the story that the American media tell about the political right in Europe is rather far from the truth. And it scares me for my industry. Final point on that, there's an American academic named Mark Lilla, teaches at Columbia in New York. He's a man of the left, but he knows a lot about France. Well, in the New York Review of Books, probably the most important intellectual journal of the left in America, in the New York Review of Books a couple of years ago, he published a long report about the new currents of the right in France. And he went there and said that there is a new group emerging in France from young Catholics. They are not about the National Front. They're not that side, nor are they the normal, Sarkozy, François Fillon, right wing. They're something different. They're around the magazine L'Incorrect and Limites. They're very Catholic. They care about the environment, etc. He wrote a really interesting profile of this new emerging Catholic leaders. Well, after it appeared in the next month, there was an angry letter from the Washington Post correspondent in Paris who said, "I can't believe you printed that. Mark Lilla is covering up for these fascists." They're not fascists, they're my friends. They even warned me when I was in Paris to do a book tour for the Benedict option. They warned me, don't go speak to this group that invited you because they really are fascist. I said, thank you for, but to this American journalist in Paris, who is the main way that, that leaders in Washington discover what is happening in France, he considers anybody to the right of François Fillon as a fascist. This is crazy, but this is the condition we live in now. Yeah, you're right about allies outside the Christian church. One of the most important lessons I received when I was in the former Soviet bloc interviewing dissidents is the importance of making allies outside the church. In Prague, I was speaking to a woman named Camille Bendova. She and her late husband, Václav, were the only Catholics in the inner circle of Václav Havel and the leading dissidents. And they were very conservative Catholics. And of course, Havel and the others were not religious at all, and they had very colorful sex lives. And so I asked Camilla, said, Camilla, was it difficult for you and your husband as faithful Catholics to be part of this? She said, absolutely not. She said, you have to understand, Rod, that when you are under a totalitarian situation, the rarest quality you can find is courage. Most Christians had no courage, she said. They just kept their heads down and tried to avoid trouble. My husband and I did not want to live that way as Christians. We felt that our job as Catholics was to stand up for the truth. And that meant that when we looked around, anybody else, the few people who had the courage to stand up for the truth had to be our best allies. And Camilla said it has to be that way for us today. I have found this to be true in the United States in this battle we now face. Two of the biggest and most important fighters against wokeness are a woman, young journalist named Barry Weiss, and an academic named Peter Boghossian. Barry Weiss is a left-wing secular Jewish lesbian who had the courage to quit her job at the New York Times because she couldn't tell the truth there, because the culture within the Times was totalitarian. Peter Boghossian is a left-wing atheist who was driven out of his university for the same reason. They are two of the most valuable people fighting this illiberal ideology in the US. And they are my friends and they are my allies. Barry told me, last year. She said, Rod, if anyone had told me 2 years ago that I would be on the same side as Rod Dreher on anything, I wouldn't have believed it. But here we are. This threat that we face together has brought us together as allies. About the funding, who's paying for this sort of thing, it's coming from NGOs. It's coming from very wealthy people in the United States. The Gates Foundation, a lot of different foundations are paying for this sort of thing. It's coming from the World Economic Forum. We have to understand this. And we mustn't panic about it, but we have to realize the nature of those who are against us. And we can't simply sit back and think that things will continue as they are forever. That we have got to wake up to the reality we're facing. I dedicated my book, Live Not by Lies, to the memory of a Catholic priest named Father Tomislav Kolakovic. He was a Jesuit from Croatia who was doing underground work against the Nazis in 1943 in Zagreb. He found out that the Gestapo was coming to arrest him, so he escaped and went to Slovakia, to his mother's homeland. He got a job teaching at the Catholic University in Bratislava, and he began to tell his students, I have good news and bad news. The good news is the Germans are going to lose this war. The bad news is the Soviets are going to be ruling this country when it's over, and the first thing the communists are going to do is come after the church, persecute the church. We have to get ready. So what Father Kolakovic did was bring together small groups of committed Catholic students and a few priests who would help them. They came together to talk about what was happening in their country, to debate it according to the principles of the church, and then to decide what are we going to do to get ready. Within 2 years, these groups had spread all over the country. The Catholic bishops at the time chastised the priests. They said, Father, you're scaring people. Stop alarming them. This is not going to happen here. But Father Kolakovic knew that the bishops were dreaming. He had studied the communist mindset because he wanted to be a missionary in the Soviet Union. So he kept working. Well, in 1948, when the Iron Curtain fell over Czechoslovakia, everything happened exactly as Father Kolakovic said it would. And because he had the vision to understand what was happening and to prepare his students, the underground church was already formed. And I think that we today are in a Kolakovic moment here in the West. It's not going to be the same as what happened in Czechoslovakia, but it is coming. I think that we have to take advantage of the liberty that we have now to come together, to talk about what's happening, to debate it, and to organize for the long resistance.